but because you handed a growing plant a starvation period, you managed to knock it off of its kilter. So all we have to think about is the fact that we can't ignore the plant's ongoing requirements, and we have to accommodate the biochar's transformation from raw biochar, which I akin to raw ground beef, a potential food, but not ready to be wolfed down, into something that the plant can interact with and the soil will benefit from. So I divide this transformation into three basic concepts, which I call conditioning, charging, and inoculating. And they just to kind of keep track of the changes that happen. Conditioning is to get this very dry material wet and equilibrate it with the groundwater in the soil. So there's an addition of moisture. There's actually a flushing, because some of the ash in the biochar is going to be water soluble, but it's going to wash away. So it's not going to be there for the whole season. And there's also potentially in some biochars some sugars, still residual sugars, that get desorbed, and these end up being soil carbon, and they also need to be conditioned out. So conditioning is one, and that's equilibrating it with the water, because growing systems have lots of water one way or another. The second one is called charging, and that is the fact that biochar is a nutrient battery, but it's an uncharged nutrient battery when it comes out of the pyrolyzer. So we need to give it an opportunity to take up some excess nutrients. Now, excess nutrients in Mother Nature often occur late in the growing season, when all the detritus is falling and the leaves are decomposing, etc. And it grabs it then and it hangs on to it all the way until next spring. But if we're going to use it sort of this week, we've got to add a source of nutrients, which is typically compost. So that's what you want to make sure that when you condition it up by getting it wet, you charge it up by having it in contact, wet contact with compost for a couple days to do that exchange, and you'll be fine. The last is called inoculating, and that's basically getting the biochar full of either living or once living microorganisms of some sort. I am not of the opinion that there's any one microorganism that you need to be providing. I'm not of the opinion that compost tea has magic mycorrhizal fungi spores that make Jack and the Beanstalk happen everywhere. I think it's more the concept of creating a soil food web where you're cycling soil organic carbon through life forms and recycling it back to other living microorganisms, etc. And not having it leach away or wash away because it's a soluble sugar. Now, having created that very complicated exercise, all three of those happen when you compost a material. So one really good idea, and one of the things I think you ought to think about using maybe a third to a half of the biochar you have, is in your current composting flow, starting at the front. And so put it in with the green compost material. And what's going to happen is in the course of passing through your compost, it's going to get conditioned because there'll be moisture exchanged. It'll charge up with nutrients thrown off by the composting process, and it'll participate in the inoculation as the microbes chew up the excess carbon and recycle around, etc. So it actually makes your composting process go faster, go better, because it's a microbial process, and biochar is synergistic with microbes. So that's one idea. The other idea is, and this can be done with just raw biochar, although I urge people to wet it, because the stuff is dry and it'll soak up 5 times its weight in water. So, even if you it's kind of like flour. Even if you throw in a splash of water and it looks like there's plenty, you stir it around for a while and it's gone. And now you need to add more. You can blend it up with some water and just top dress it. And then, maybe mulch over it a little bit or dig it into the top. But, don't make it right down into the roots where it can compete locally for fertilizer or plant nutrients. But make it available in the soil to then equilibrate, and it'll work itself in over the course of the growing season. So you don't need to go through a whole composting step to get it ready. You're welcome to, you know, wet it up and top dress it. Just don't rototill, don't till it down in so that it's going to be right where the roots are immediately. Give it a little time for that to happen. And other than that, we're really looking for people that are such expert, you know, growers to bring their expertise to bear, because you know what you're looking for in a soil, and you know what your plants are looking for, and you have these terrific data collecting mechanisms called your fingers and your senses and your taste buds, as the case may be, although we try to steer the green manure people away from the taste budders. You know, they just have a problem with each other's lifestyles, although biochar is very good for you. There you go. No, you're right. You're right. So, we have a lot of people that taste their soil and taste their biochar and taste every, you know, they're just the proof of the pudding's in the eating, apparently. So, I know. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, again, I think the idea is, keep in mind, the goal is to have your biochar at the end of the day or end of the century or whatever to be 5 to 10 volume% of that root zone. So that's about 1/4 of an inch of biochar worked down in to the whole root zone. So you don't need to be piling it up. It's not replacing anything in the soil. It's augmenting the dynamics of the soil. And the other thing to keep in mind is that biochar makes soil more efficient in that it does more with less or does the same with less or something like that. It doesn't necessarily take an already very prosperous soil and make it twice as productive, because there's really nothing slowing the growth down in a very favorable growing system. So you need to be taking advantage of the biochar by perhaps providing less water or providing less compost than you normally do, because the biochar will help the soil do a better job of making those inputs available to the plant. So, you know, this is a problem we run into with, we run into it with the USDA, who wants to put biochar in cornfields, and instead of getting 200 bushels an acre, they want to get 400 bushels an acre. And you realize the amount of corn coming off this land is the amount of sunlight. It's got nothing to do. There's nothing missing. This is Roundup ready corn. You got no insects, no bugs, no microbes, no shortage of fertilizer, no shortage of water. And yeah, so that's not the concept. The concept is to let the plant grow in a natural way, and to be able to have either more plant based on existing inputs, and that's where you have excess sunshine, or you're able to save a bit. And if you're doing watering by hand, be very conscious of the fact that if you have the biochar in there, you may not have to water as often. Go check it before you start throwing the water on it, because it's gonna hold that water longer, because that's what biochar does, and that's what all those microbes are going to do. And if you have marginal soils that you're having hard times getting things growing in, perfect situation where biochar can really make the difference. I had a colleague of mine that does urban trees, and when they fertilize these big urban trees, they actually spray something underneath the canopy so that they don't get a lot of weeds, because they just put down a lot of fertilizer, and so it's a pretty fertile setting for dandelions. So they spray afterwards with something to stop all those invasive, predatory, uninvited guests. Well, this year they did exactly what they normally do, except they put down biochar at the same time, and it soaked up all the growth inhibitor. And the guy said the dandelions were like bowling balls. You didn't want to touch them. They were just ready to take your hand off. They were just doing so well, because you'd taken all the toxicity out of the system. Yeah, so again, you have some plants, if you have repetitive crops, some plants tend to put out some phytotoxins to inhibit competition for the soil and stuff. They even can inhibit their own productivity in the soil. And biochar can be quite effective, because it basically takes those out of circulation, gets rid of the phytotoxicity. So again, it's kind of a tool, like compost is a tool, but it's a tool that you need to apply all your expertise to. And keep in mind, again, it's only 5 to 10 volume percent of the growing soil. So that 55-gallon drum, which is not chock full, but mostly full, should end up being, 10 to 20 drums of growing soil. It's not it's not paprika, but it doesn't need to be a replacement for your soil. I am. Let me do this though. I'm going to try putting you on speaker so that John can hear because you're going to start asking questions. Up till now, I've just been soapboxing, and I apologize for that. But yeah, well, it gets a few of the concepts behind us, and but let me throw you on speaker, and then we're all going to do voice checks to see if it's working. Hang on just a sec. Okay, we're now in theory on speakerphone. Are you there, Barry?
I am here.
Do you hear me as if I'm at the other end of the Holland Tunnel?
Yes.
Is it intolerable, or do we want to try to fly with it?
It's great. It's easy.
And John is going to weigh in now so you can tell the voices apart. And he'll introduce himself, by the way.
Hi, I'm John, and...
Hi, John. I heard you.
Okay.
Good.
So John is a activist grower. So let's start with your questions, and we'll have a dialogue.
My first question is, what is the pH of this as is, raw?
This material, the stuff you got, is very low ash, and the pH is probably very close to neutral, but in any event, it has virtually no buffering capacity. So I would say that the pH, that biochar is going to be the pH of the water you flush it with the first time. So because it is very high purity biochar made from clean sawdust, and it doesn't have a very high ash content, you're going to, the pH is, you can check it, but it's not, I'll tell you can check it tonight. It might be 7.5. Leave it out in a glass of water overnight. It'll soak up enough carbon dioxide from the air. It'll be down to 6.5 tomorrow afternoon, and it'll be down to 5.5 in a week.
Right.
So it's really not a plant shock issue. You're welcome to check it if you normally do that kind of stuff. But again, if you check it with the blend of compost you're going to put it all in with, because that's going to take the pH wherever that would normally go.
Right. Because I was specifically thinking of existing blueberries, and so I don't want to raise the pH.
Oh, I would be very surprised if that biochar
Right.
did anything significant along those lines.
Yeah. Perfect.
That particular biochar was one that I processed to quite an elevated absorption capacity. So it's pretty well behaved stuff. We work hard at trying to make it better than just black stuff, and so I'm interested in your feedback. But you shouldn't. One good rinse and you'll be done with any of the pH and total dissolved solids, brackish-ishness, and any leachable carbon kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I let John have a question turn?
Oh, if you've got a list, let's rip through your list and then he can fill in. I think he's on a pretty steep learning curve.
Okay. So aside from the blueberries, I have some old apple trees that are fantastic, and I have vegetable and flower gardens. So my next question will be the apple trees. From reading in one of these chapters, it sounds like I should try the banding method. But you're saying after soaking, I can do with or without compost, but make sure it's been soaked.
Yeah. So let's talk about what you're trying to make better in the apple trees world. They're established trees, so they have a good root system that extends out.
They're actually more than established trees. They're about 100 years old, and I don't think anybody's taken care of them in probably 20 or 30 years. And they make incredible apples.
So let's go passively by working at fixing the top layer of soil, top dressing some materials, soil amendments on, and letting the tree sense that potential and send up some gatherers to that area of the soil. You know,
Yeah.
I think that's going to get you the most improvement because it's a set tree. It's anchored. You don't want to go down in and start probing the soils around it and injecting things around it, etc. But any biochar and any mulching would also be good about keeping the moisture, because usually for apple trees a lot of it's the moisture during the course of the season, because you're not going to be out there irrigating it, and frankly, you're very much at the whims of the season.
Right. Yeah. So when do you recommend not composting the biochar before using it?
Well, the thing really comes down to how long the compost is going to last one season. So when you've got a growing crop, your compost is basically providing what that plant is growing with. It's the food for that plant to create a lot of plant.
Right.
So I would say any seasonal crop where you're starting off and creating a significant new amount of biomass out of that soil, you need to have the compost in addition to the biochar. For established crops like these apple trees, I think the composting portion is less critical because the tree has a network to gather micronutrients quite a large area, and it actually gets a lot of its potassium and phosphorus from its leaves that dropped the previous fall and decay, and then it makes nitrogen by feeding sugar extrudates down through the roots to the fungi and things in exchange for the ammonia that it needs. So what it really needs is it needs more microbial support in the soils around it and more moisture modulation. So there, I think top dressing with a lower ratio or almost no biochar. Again, because we don't have a lot of biochar, we try to get as much bang for the buck that we can. Now, in 10 years, we may find ourselves recycling relatively large amounts of woody residues that are available back into biochar, and we've got it to toss around for very noble causes like your massively neglected apple orchard,
Well, that's just a few trees. It's not an orchard.
Okay. Well, let's start with one tree and let's do some top dressing around it so we can see that, and then but do monitor how that soil is evolving around that tree versus the other trees.
Okay, that's easy. And so now the vegetables and cutting flowers, annual flowers, are in raised beds. They're actually lowered. I lowered the pathways. I didn't raise the beds. My soil is about 2 feet deep. It's of loam.
Oh, wow.
Amazing. And somebody had, last year was my first year, but somebody had gardened there the previous year and applied a lot of pig manure, composted pig manure, and that plus the compost that I make, it's really amazing. It's fantastic. So it sounds like what I'm going to be looking for with the biochar is testing the the moisture level before watering.
Yes, and that's where your improvement will occur. And it'll be interesting. You may get away with less water or require less water, or you may get more growth, because it's hard to say whether you may think you're providing all the water and the ideal growing climate, but if the plant isn't happy, then it grows at its own rate.
Right, and last year everything grew so amazingly. I realized that I should have planted things a lot further apart. It was like it was like a magic garden, literally.
Well, a tough act to follow. I don't know. Maybe I should come get my biochar, and I'll give you my competition's biochar.
Well, the other thing is Farmer's Almanac says we're going to have a very hot, dry summer.
Good.
So I was predicting that we would be watering more, and we do water by hand, mostly because I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And so I can use a moisture meter. So I will know.
Yeah, Yeah, that'd be great.
No,
Well,
no.
don't wear yourself out writing down numbers, but I think if you can give yourself a memory aid, so at the end of the season you look back and say, "Gee, that turned out great over there. Wonder what I did right." You can resurrect a little bit of what was happening there.
Okay. And do you recommend composting biochar first, or can I mix it with compost and soak it before planting?
You can do either, and I just like to give it a couple days soaking in water with the made compost, so that you can get all the exchanging done of the nutrients and get the charging out of the way.
Okay.
You know, it's the reason I like to have people try a little bit at the front end is that in a year or two, that's all they're going to do. They're just going to keep flowing their biochar into the front end of their composting system, and it'll just follow that material right out to the field, and it won't be a separate step. But but you're certainly welcome to blend it. You know, a typical commercial blend is, you know, somewhere between a quarter to a half biochar by volume, the rest compost. Get it good and wet, because again, that biochar is going to soak up a lot of moisture, and you need to let the moisture's how the compost is exchanging things with the biochar in that situation.
Yes.
And give it a couple days, and you'll be good to go.
Okay, great. And because we are a retreat center, we make a lot of compost. So,
Good.
yeah, then I think I'm going to be using a lot of it to make compost, because it's,
We probably need to set you up with a way of making biochar.
well, yeah, that probably is true. And so perennial flowers, probably just top dressing.
I would just top dress, and again, I think part of that is what's going to happen in flowers. What we see in a lot of plants where quality is a big metric. So that's spices, and that's, you know, grapes, and that's flowers, because the healthier the plant is, the better the bloom is, the brighter the colors are, etc. Is that the top dressing gives you a boost on the microbial synergisms, and that's all you have to do. You know, you're certainly not shorting these flowers on, you know, compost and, you know, water and stuff. You're really, you know, you're being real nice to them. So yeah, let's just try a little top dressing, maybe 1/8 of an inch, and then work it down in 1/2 inch with your fingers and let it go.
Okay, I'm just writing that down. About an 1/8 inch layer, and then
Work it down into the first inch of the soil, so we don't really get, you know, competing. You know, if you're starting the plants from seeds, you're welcome to put it all the way down through the soil.
Yeah.
I just want to avoid that situation where you got a growing plant and you throw a change, you know, overnight.
Right.
You know, you have to go back. I remember my kids. It took forever to get them to try broccoli. So, you know, it's an annual exercise. It's a migration. It's not a step change. You can't announce today broccoli's suddenly on the list.
It's to trick them, actually, the first time.
Ah, I know. I was yes. I'll take that under advisement.
So then, good, because the conditioning really is, if you're blending it with finished compost and water, it's only a couple of days.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it can be as short as 24 hours if you were to flood it. I tell people, if someone comes to me and says, I got to use it tomorrow, I say, all right, take the biochar, take your compost, put it in a plastic garbage can, fill it all the way up with water. Lots of excess water. Drain that water. Now put another rinse of water in. Now go chuck in, you know, well, with compost you've got some, but if they don't have compost, then they have to go and throw in soluble fertilizer and charge it up with that stuff, and then drain it off, and off you go. So you can hasten the process, but keep in mind, this is a system invented by Mother Nature, who's an enormously patient person and more than willing to take their time.
2 days is good for me. That's fine.
2 days is more than one, I'll grant you that, but at least we're not, yes. So again, and I think, you know, don't deprive yourself of your own instincts as a grower. You know, because one of the things you should probably do is when you mix that biochar compost blend, go out and feel it each day and see if it's changing. and if it's still changing, let it line itself out.
Yeah.
If it's not, then you're done.
Right. Okay. So I have several compost piles that were in different stages of growth, of life, the decomposition.
Yeah.
When the winter started, and so now I'll be going out there after the rain this week, and we would be turning these piles. So there are different stages. Should I add some good volume of biochar to each of those now at the next turning, or should I just do new piles with biochar and mix with finish?
I think for this with this limited amount of biochar in this season, I would say if you're going to put biochar into compost, do it either at the very beginning so you know exactly what the process is, or do it at the very end so you know exactly what you're doing. If you get yourself changing horses in the middle of the stream, you really don't know what went right or what went wrong. Usually your composting has thrown off most of its nutrients, the ammonia and stuff, early in the cycle. And if it's gone through the winter, there isn't going to be a whole lot more NPK that's going to be abandoned as it seasons out. So I would say now let's just restrict ourselves and take a portion, put it into a brand new composting cycle starting in the middle of the summer or something, and aim it for the soil in the fall, and then use the other material on some of these top dressing and these experiments.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to be starting new compost now just because we have basically kitchen scraps that have been frozen all winter, and we've layered them with leaves, shredded leaves. So
it's your call. Again, I'm concerned that a drum of biochar is going to get spread too thin, and that's one of the things. It's not paprika. It's not it's. Go ahead.
So do you recommend, since you have raised beds for the vegetables, even though they're not, it's not really test plots because I don't have 2 plots of broccoli, more I have, chard and I might have different crops in one bed. Should I do one bed that I don't put any biochar in, or just go ahead and use it and then just tell you how much I loved it at the end of the year?
It's really your learning curve. The material you've got is very clean. There's no real concern that you're going to get a negative effect. I'm not really worried about that. I don't want to cut down on the productivity of your garden by making you intentionally have a control that underperforms, because that's work on your part just to prove that. So it's really I'm good with all those. I don't. If you do set one portion aside without biochar, make it a small portion just so you've got a benchmark.
Okay, or maybe it would be fun to just do a little corner of one crop.
Yeah. So we're not doing this 50-50 stuff. You're going to just set aside one little bit, 5% or 10%. And just as a comparison, if someone says, oh, the soil looks great, you go, yeah, but this is the stuff the year before, and it made that change. So you might want it just for sort of your own metric.
Okay, can do that. I think that's all my questions.
I would just add one about confirming that your description for flowers applies equally to roses.
Did I mention I'm a chemical engineer? I thought a rose was a flower, so you're kind of catching me off guard with these trivia questions. I believe it is across the board, because it really comes down to whether if the plant is expressing on the basis of basically how healthy the plant is, we see very good performance with biochar. If the plant is expressing on the basis of volume, like corn to ethanol, then it's usually the amount of fertilizer you pound into the plant and force feed it that creates just more and more biomass. I mean, it's really a very artificial, it's not the normal way a plant grows, but you can make the plant overeat and overproduce, fruit but it's not, it's not healthy fruit. So I would expect that the roses, yeah, the same sort of concept.
So this this would work in large fields in the Midwest with corn, for example, but it would mostly probably have to do with management of water and humidity.
Yeah, again, and that's a problem because most of the time your industrial ag, the amount of NPK and the amount of irrigation water is all insurance, so that you get the most the sunlight will get you. And so they're not about. So it's going to be a while before they can start realizing the value of biochar because they're afraid to take advantage of it. Where I think you'll see it adopted though is land that's not irrigated. There's a lot of land in Colorado now they're not planting because they can't get the water. They don't have the water. So this is a place where they may be able to plant a drought resistant strain of grass or wheat or something like that, and they'll get more productivity out of the limited natural precipitation whereas before what they planted their standard hybrid, high yield, high demand crop, they know that crop's going to fail.
Well, I've seen the dust
I
blowing.
cannot hear John's question at all.
Well, I've seen the dust blowing off fields in western Minnesota when it wasn't really drought. It was maybe a little bit dry. So I think this is a grave concern, the moisture, and maybe biochar offers something to these people, these farmers.
Yeah, I think it does, although we're really, the whole industry knows that the day $1 worth of biochar is a better investment than $1 worth of NPK or $1 worth of Roundup or $1 worth of water is the day the market just went to infinity. Right now what we're trying to do is demonstrate its efficacy on those growing systems that have a lot of human contact, so we get a lot of data and observation and the learning curve occurring. Because it is at this point a very sort of new material, and it's hard to get a hold of, and we need to get the chicken and the egg in cycle at this point. We need to teach the world how to enjoy omelets, and we need to teach people how to enjoy raising chickens, and that's what's involved. So Barry, I think you need to get your hands dirty. I think that's what's going to be the thing that really creates the questions, and let's just leave it that you either phone me or email me, and I'll get back to you, thereabouts, and sort it out.
Okay, so wonderful. Thank you for this fun experiment.
Well, I'm hoping that at some point we can come up and see the fruits of your labor, and that's the place I'm leaving Amy's initiative to do that sort of thing. But thank you for taking this on, and keep up the good work. And again, it's probably in the fall we'll teach you how to make your own biochar, because your retreats would love to do that. I mean, there's nothing like fire to bring out just a sense of tranquility. It's actually in our gene makeup that a fire is a comforting thing, because humans can control fire and it scares away all the predators. So we have this subconscious relaxation that when there's a fire, the cave is warm and we're safe.
Yeah.
And those things come across. It's the campfire phenomena. That's why you'll sit and watch a campfire. Is because it's stimulating your primal. It's actually relaxing your primal fear of what could go wrong, because the fire's there to protect you.
Yeah, that's great. We're having a bonfire tonight. My brush pile from last year.
Well, actually, if you get it roaring and then have the ability to put it out with a hose, you'll quench a lot of it at a pretty good char.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you right now, that char has to be composted, because it's very variable.
Yeah.
It goes all the way from real cooked out to stuff that's barely cooked. So let's, if you go that route, and you don't have to cut it off in the middle, but if you find yourself wanting to go to bed and you want to put it out with a hose, then just go out the next day and rake up all the black char and then throw it in the front end of the compost, and by the time it comes out the other end, it'll be good to go.
Huh. That's easy.
The best one of the best biochars I've ever tested was created by the Boy Scouts of America at a bonfire at a campout. And they had this enormous pile of wood, and it was roaring so hot, and then the fire department got to put it out with their hoses, and they quenched it. And they probably got some what's called activation occurring, where the steam is so hot that it actually makes activated carbon kind of stuff. And it was really, I tested it, it was phenomenal. And I tell people making biochar, you know, think about quality, because it's you against the Boy Scouts of America. And they're prepared. They love fire. Boy, I was a scoutmaster. You can work hard to get their attention until you strike a match, at which point you've got them in the palm of your hand.
That's great.
So let's
marshmallows and wieners and.
There you go. There you go. So good talking. Keep in touch and have fun.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hugh.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
Nice to meet you, John. Bye bye.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. Now we have to go earn our keep. We have to go and make drums. We have to convince drums to leave the ground and end up in the back of a pickup truck, which is at some point us against gravity.